Welcome back to A People's Guide to Publishing. I'm Joe Beal, the founder and CEO of Microcosm Publishing and Distribution. I'm also the author of A People's Guide to Publishing, which distills what I've learned from selling millions of books over the past 25 years.
I'm Ellie Blue. I'm the editorial and marketing director here at Microcosm. We are an independent mid-list publisher based in Portland, Oregon. We have 14 employees, over 650 titles in print with 20 to 40 new books per year, and we distribute thousands of titles from other publishers.
We started this podcast so that we can share what we've learned with newer publishers so that you can learn from our mistakes.
Or perhaps you just want to better understand the publishing industry.
You may remember a few weeks, months, who can remember, it's pandemic ago, that we talked about all of the reasons that Barnes & Noble, long thought of as the bookstore that represents all bookstores, who knows why, had been shrinking and changing and morphing over the past 30 years when its market dominance was all but assured. So this week we are actually going to do them a little free public service and talk about all the things that their new owners and strategists are doing right.
Barnes & Noble, you are full of surprises.
Hey, who says bookstore industry doesn't evolve?
So I can tell you one reason I think they had market dominance a while ago. This may be a little bit beside the point, but I just had a flashback to when I was a teenager and Barnes & Noble was the only suburban bookstore that had new books. I mean, I actually lived in an area with a lot of bookstores, but if you didn't want to go to the city, you went to Barnes & Noble, which, there's a lot to be said about that, but it was where I discovered a lot of really mainstream books. As well as zines. I discovered zines at Barnes & Noble.
Oh, wow.
Not because they had them, because I read about them in a book I got there.
You didn't have a Borders? I probably asked you this on our last episode.
We had no Borders. I had not even heard of Borders until I moved to Portland.
It's very progressive.
I know. It seemed like it would be better. Mm-hmm. Anyway, Barnes & Noble now, today...
Is like a whole different company.
Like, for a while I went through a phase where it was like a coffee shop that happened to have books.
Yeah.
And a gift shop that happened to have books.
And if you followed the news in the trades the last 5 to 10 years, it was like every article about Barnes & Noble was like, Barnes & Noble shifts planograms again to offer more puzzles and games. Barnes & Noble eliminates more books. Barnes & Noble, adds restaurants and bars. All of those are real stories. All of them relatively failed.
And it's like the book thing wasn't working for them, and you could kind of tell why, because they didn't really have the books you wanted.
Yeah. And, and I think it's such a ubiquitous chain. But you're not going to sell more books because you're a restaurant. People don't go to restaurants to buy books.
So Barnes & Noble was recently purchased.
It's true. They are now owned by the same investment corporation that owns the British chain, Chapters.
Oh, Waterstones. Right?
Waterstones, I'm sorry, yes.
Chapters is the Canadian.
Oh,
one,
yeah,
right?
yeah. The other, who can remember? We haven't been allowed to travel in 9 months.
All the other countries are blending in together.
There's other countries. I thought there was no borders.
Yeah.
Changing your tune, Blue.
We're getting into a whole different world of politics now. Let's talk about Barnes & Noble some more.
Got it. So... there was a lot of concern over this, or maybe not even concern. So, I guess the concern came years ago, and now people are just, thoroughly convinced that it's over and futile, So, but the news has been reported on diligently, and, it does seem like Barnes & Noble is doing some really cool and interesting things.
So what are the things they're doing that are impressing you?
Longtime fans of this program may remember the episode where Ellie and I presented at the Pacific Northwest Booksellers Association about the value of having a curated, specialized store that focuses on face-outs rather than depth of catalog. And I'm not going to say that we're influencers, but I am going to tell you that Barnes & Noble has 100% since adopted exactly the strategy that we recommended.
Maybe they had a secret plant in the audience, or maybe it's just a good idea.
Mm-hmm. and which is essentially to say that, once upon a time, strategies like anything else shift all the time. So Barnes & Noble used to really focus on new books, bestsellers, evergreen titles, meaning books that will have as much relevance in 10 years as they have today, and books that have created a certain kind of shelf and or market dominance, things like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, or What to Expect When You're Expecting, books like that really have a place. There will always be pregnant people, and there will always be people that are looking for a financial leg up. And, now they've really cut that back. The new approach is to say less is more. Discoverability is everything. You don't want a person to walk in and look at a bunch of spines, become overwhelmed and dissuaded and not browse. You want somebody to see a book face out on display and be like, that looks cool. What's that about? Let's check that out. And that it's better to special order things for people than it is to have everything that people would conceivably walk in and be looking for.
And they're also, one of the other big changes that they're making, and it kind of appalls me that this is a change, is that they're letting local stores choose their own books and do their own ordering instead of making every store have the same selection, which obviously, it
seems a no-brainer.
If you've ever been anywhere and met anyone.
And which is to say, that the old purchasing habit of decades now is to assume that customers in Miami were the same as customers in Montana were the same as customers in Los Angeles, which is obviously false. And there was a great interview with a manager of a store in Idaho who was they send us all these New York best-selling books that our customers we don't have many people that want that, so we return 90% of what is sent to us, and I don't understand why it took years to change that. And then, so previously purchasing decisions were made out of their New York office, and then to some degree there were regional purchasing offices because there was some acknowledgement that at least books in the Pacific Northwest would want Pacific Northwest travel books rather than New York City garden books, or what have you. But now it's a little unclear, to what degree or percentage this shift is happening, but the big one, is essentially, stores will be allowed to handle purchasing at the local level, meaning, you will presumably, supposedly, allegedly, be able to veto when they say, here is 1,000 copies of the new Stephen King. They can be yeah, I get it. The publisher wants this here, but our customers don't.
And I'm really optimistic about this as a publisher because, in the past, whenever we've sold to Barnes & Noble, we've been, super trepidatious, or we've even turned down the sale sometimes because they'll take, 3,000 copies of a book, and then they'll return 2,500 of them because, the 3 stores that our books would sell at probably did very well with them. Mm-hmm. And the rest of them, we get them all back damaged. So, for publishers, this is also a really good thing. You'll make fewer sales, but you'll also get fewer returns, which is what you want. Yeah.
And for us, it's always been better to sell 600 to 1,000 copies of a book, even though, that is too few, because it's always better to sell them too few instead of too many. And, we have some books where they do reorder, replenish, and keep it on the shelf all the time because it's, as I said, an evergreen book.
So here's to a great new era for Barnes & Noble. May suburban teenagers everywhere find the subversive literature they need there.
We're looking out for you. And, and this will also probably help the pattern we talked about on our previous program of them using excessive inventory return to make up when they run out of cash to pay for something, which has been the other thing that has really stabbed them in the side repeatedly when you want the store to have the books that people want on the shelves.
It's got to be hard to be gigantic.
I wouldn't know.
Better them than us.
Till next week. Thanks for joining us once again.
Please send your questions to podcast@microcosmpublishing.com so we can answer them on future episodes.
And please give us 5 stars on iTunes and everywhere else that podcasts are reviewed.
You can find us on the internet at microcosm.pub.
On Twitter at Microcosm.
On Facebook at Microcosm Publishing.
On Instagram at Microcosm_pub.
And here in Portland, Oregon on North Williams Avenue.
Thank you so much.
Have a wonderful week.